On the way home, I suddenly saw barrage comments with my own eyes. They said my wife is a gold digger, and before marrying me, she had countless admirers at her feet. Stepfather, class monitor, university professor. She was also expelled from school for being an academic seductress. After getting married, she would still cheat on me with my direct superior. And as the honest man who took the fall, my only role is to play the part of an incompetent husband, to add a bit of spice between her and her boss. Right now, I'm driving the boss home for dinner. He eagerly suggested, Zou, have your wife buy a case of wine tonight. Let's have a few drinks and chat about your promotion and raise. I stomped on the brake. Under the immense inertia, my boss's head hit the roof with a dull thud, like a water-filled ball. Damn it, he cursed loudly. Zou, what the hell is wrong with you? Can you even drive? Human Manual Rule 5. After accidentally hurting a human, you must apologize to them. If necessary, it can also be embellished with lies. So I sincerely said to my boss, sorry, cat just passed by in front. Really? My boss, holding his red and swollen forehead, said suspiciously, why didn't I see it? It has already run into the bushes. The boss was very displeased. Next time you encounter a situation like this, just run it over. It's just a cat. What if you give me a concussion? I obediently said, okay. Then asked with concern, should I take you to the hospital? The barrage comments mocked me one after another. This female lead's husband is way too naive. How could the boss go to the hospital? He's planning to get you drunk tonight and have his way with the female lead. No, I just got here. Is the female lead really going to end up with her boss? That boss looks like a pig. Even for a raunchy story, you can't be that indiscriminate. The person above must be a woman, right? This is a male-oriented story. As long as the female lead is beautiful, everything else is just flavor. Sure enough, the boss said, it's just a minor injury. Once we get to your place, have your wife give me a simple bandage. Then, as if thinking of something, he chuckled twice. Not to say anything, Zou, but your wife's hands look really skillful. I agreed, saying Shen Tang's hands are indeed very skillful. The next second, another sudden brake jolted us. With a loud thud, the boss's head kissed the car roof once again. This time, it was much more serious than before. Bright red blood slowly trickled down his forehead, making him look like a cream puff drenched in raspberry sauce. Not only pleasing to the eye, but also delicious to the taste. I swallowed my saliva and still politely asked him, Brother Lou, do you want to go to the hospital now? He didn't answer me. I followed the traffic rules, obediently parked the car by the roadside, and then reached out to nudge him. Turns out he had fainted. No wonder he wasn't responding to me. What to do? No matter how skillful Shen Tang's hands were, they couldn't handle an injury like this. I had no choice but to take him to the hospital, reluctantly saying goodbye. Sorry, Brother Lou. I'll have to invite you over for dinner another time. After a pause, I kindly reminded him, next time you're in a car, remember to buckle your seatbelt. He was still dazed and didn't respond to me. How rude. When I got home, Shen Tang had already prepared 5 dishes and a soup. Hearing the sound of the door opening, she quickly came over to help me take off my coat and brought me slippers from the shoe cabinet. She asked gently, why are you back so late? I stretched my shoulders and back and replied, there was a bit of traffic on the way. She glanced behind me, a hint of confusion in her voice as she asked, where's your boss? Didn't he say he was coming over for dinner today? I replied casually. He suddenly felt unwell on the way. So he's not coming today. Shen Tang visibly breathed a sigh of relief. The barrage comments appeared again. What's going on? Isn't today the female lead's first time with her boss? Why hasn't the boss shown up? I've got the tissues ready. And this is it, don't worry. The boss won't let the female lead off that easily. He had his eye on her during the last team building event with families. If not this time, then next time. TSK, TSK, TSK. But the female lead looks pretty disappointed. Is she secretly hoping something happens tonight too? Feeling lost, I carefully studied my wife's expression. It seemed more like relief to me. But given that I haven't been human for long, I'm not very familiar with human facial expressions. With a serious and responsible attitude, I still asked Shen Tang for her opinion. Are you disappointed? She was taken aback. What? I patiently repeated my words. Brother Lu didn't come tonight. Are you disappointed? Her face turned very pale and her dark eyes glanced at me. Do you want the truth? I said, of course. Shen Tang curled the corner of her mouth. I'm not just disappointed, I'm actually quite happy, she said. I hate your boss. I hate the way he looks at me, like I'm a dish to go with his drink. The female lead is being stubborn again. Exactly. At first, you could barely say her boss was threatening her with her husband's job to make her comply, but later on, wasn't she enjoying it herself? She's just the female lead of that kind of story. Why pretend to be a virtuous woman? So annoying. Why is it that the comments and what Shen Tang says are always the opposite? Article 17 of the Human Manual. If you are fortunate enough to have a human partner, either trust him/her unconditionally or devour him/her without leaving a single bite. I don't want to eat Shen Tang for now, so I choose to trust my beautiful wife. I nodded and said to her, then I'll resign. Shen Tang's expression froze. What? I said matter-of-factly. Since you don't like my boss, I'll just quit. That's not necessary. She gave me a complicated look and pulled me to sit at the dining table. Just don't invite him over for dinner anymore. What a considerate wife. When I tasted the food she made, this thought only deepened. I am truly lucky in my first life as a human. I have a wife who is so considerate, kind, and a great cook. This makes me a little jealous of the poor soul I devoured. What was his name again? Oh, Zou Yan. Now that's my name. After dinner, my wife and I returned to the bedroom. I don't get tired, and I can pause or resume at any time. Both my wife and I are very satisfied with that. I am not a useless husband at all. After it was over, Shen Tang's face still carried a lingering blush. I carefully brushed a strand of sweat-dampened hair behind her ear with my fingertips. Shen Tang turned over into my arms, pressing her cool palm against my chest. Why is your heartbeat so slow? Her voice was like a murmur. Her pitch-black pupils fixed on me. A human's heartbeat shouldn't be this slow. It does seem a bit slow. I was too excited just now and forgot to maintain my heartbeat. I adjusted it slightly and asked her, how about now? Much better, she said, pulling her hand back and turning over to go back to sleep. I felt a little disappointed, but I still took the initiative to move closer and wrapped my arms around her from behind. Thank you, dear, for helping me feel a little more human today. The next day, I went to work as usual. As soon as my left foot stepped into the company, Brother Lu called me into his office. I still hadn't hit him hard enough, actually managed to come to work. He stared at me gloomily, his thick hands crossed over his chest, and hoarsely informed me that I would be going on a business trip to the neighboring city in the afternoon. I frowned. So sudden. He let out a cold chuckle and pointed to the bandage on his head. A business trip or a trip to the police station, take your pick. Sai, I know this plot. In human society, to make a living and support a family, a man has to put up with a fair share of humiliation in the workplace. I reluctantly agreed to the business trip. With time running short, I only had a moment to call my wife before boarding the high-speed train. The familiar barrage of comments appeared once again. I thought the boss's part was over, but it turns out there are always more solutions than problems. She actually managed to send the heroine's husband away. Great. The boss is now taking advantage of the female lead's husband being away on a business trip and has already driven to her house. Hope he can sweep her off her feet. Exciting. This is my favorite part with the boss. My boss is a typical middle-aged corporate manager. He's slightly balding, has a dark complexion, a burly build, and walks like a full-grown brown bear. What kind of person would expect something to happen between my beautiful wife and a brown bear? How could they be more monstrous than me, a monster myself? With this question in mind, I activated the mycelium left on my wife. In an instant, the perspective shifted back to home. I saw my boss trick my wife into opening the front door under the pretext of looking for an important document. Shen Tang politely poured him a glass of water and then went to the study to search for the document he mentioned. While she was searching, a pair of large hands suddenly reached out from behind and wrapped around her slender waist. Hot breath sprayed against her ear, faintly carrying the stench of tobacco. Mrs. Zou, I've liked you for a long time. That Zou guy is shallow, lacks ability, and doesn't deserve you. Do you know he's already on the layoff list? Help me out, and I'll cross his name off, okay? Lu Yan trembled with excitement, one hand gripping Shen Tang's waist while the other fumbled hastily with his belt. I manipulated that mycelium, aiming it at his temple, ready to deliver the fatal blow. The next second, I abruptly halted my movement. My prey was dead, or rather half dead. Shen Tang pulled a knife from the side compartment of the desk and plunged it into Lu Yan's fat belly. Her hand was steady, but her gaze was icy cold. As she slowly drove the blade fully into his abdomen, she asked softly, "Mr. Lu, what did you just say? Why is there a knife here?" I rested my chin on my hand, deep in thought. But most of the time I spend in the study is sleeping, so it's normal that I don't know. From a mycelium's perspective, the killing process is still ongoing. Lu Yan is still alive. He clutches his abdomen, wailing, and stumbles out of the study, trying to unlock the security door. Unfortunately, the soundproofing in my house is very good, and when he came in, he even deliberately locked the door. The second strike came as expected. It plunged deep into his lung. He couldn't speak anymore, collapsed on the ground convulsing, with pale pink foam bubbling from his mouth. Shen Tang crouched beside him, looking down at him, her dark hair tips brushing faintly against his face. She frowned slightly, displeased, and said, "You've made the floor dirty." The third strike landed on his neck. Lu Yan completely stopped breathing. I saw Shen Tang crouch in place, staring blankly for a while, before dragging my boss into the bathroom. A dead body becomes exceptionally heavy. It took her a long time to stuff the body into the bathtub. After resting for a moment, she went to the kitchen and fetched a 50-centimeter cooking pot. The kitchen lights stayed on all night. When dawn broke, Shen Tang threw the remaining bones along with the clothes into the outskirts. My silly wife. The evidence she left behind was even more abundant than the clothes in her wardrobe. The next evening, I finished my business trip. After the high-speed train arrived at the station, I wasn't in a hurry to go home. Instead, I first went to the place where my wife had buried the body, dug up the bones and clothes, and ate them. Then I transformed into the boss's likeness and returned to his home. After opening the door, a woman walked out of the bedroom. She crossed her arms and looked at me coldly. "You still remember to come back? Which little tramp did you spend the night with this time?" After devouring the boss, I obtained all his memories and knew that this was the boss's wife. They are in the middle of a divorce, but have been delaying signing the papers due to disputes over property division. I said to her, "I've made up my mind. As you said, I'll leave all the property to you and the child and walk away with nothing." A hint of shock and confusion flickered in the woman's eyes, but she quickly replied, "Then let's go sign the papers now." After signing, she swiftly moved out of the house with the child. I spat out one of my boss's bones and used mycelium to build him a new body. This body looked exactly like my boss. He stared at me with vacant eyes, muttering, "Master." I comfortingly patted his slightly balding head and said to him, "Jump off the building." He obediently said, "Okay," then climbed to the rooftop. Once the crowd gathered downstairs, and the firefighter's ambulance and his boss's ex-wife had all arrived, he jumped off the rooftop without hesitation, splattering into a pool of flesh. On my way home, my phone was soon flooded with news of the boss's suicide. After arriving home, Shen Tang had already prepared the meal. She told me to change clothes and eat, while she herself tidied up the suitcase I had brought back in the living room. She looked much paler and thinner, and most of the dishes on the table were green vegetables. I don't like vegetables, so I went to the living room to watch her unpack. She seemed distracted, and it was a long while before she noticed me standing behind her. She asked, "Why aren't you going to eat? Not to your taste." I said, "Waiting for you." I walked over and touched her slender, fair neck. Ice cold, with a hint of dampness from sweat. I asked, "Why have you lost so much weight?" She forced a faint smile but didn't answer. I casually said, "By the way, did you know? My boss died." The subordinate's neck stiffened. I continued, I heard it was because of an unhappy marriage, so she jumped off a building and committed suicide. Shen Tang paused her movements. Jumped off a building and committed suicide. She turned to look at me, a faint trace of confusion in her pitch-black eyes. Yeah. I kissed her lips, pulled her up from the floor, and wrapped my arm around her as we walked to the dining room. I pulled out a chair at the table for her to sit down. In a relaxed tone, she said, "My direct boss is gone. Looks like I'm getting a promotion and a raise." Shen Tang kept her eyes on me. She had cat-like eyes, with large pupils and slightly upturned corners. When she focused on someone, there was a natural innocence in her gaze. After a moment, she lowered her eyes and picked up the glass on the table. "That's really great, honey. I wish you success in your promotion and raise." I also raised my glass, the crisp clink of glass against glass ringing pleasantly. I smiled and said, "To my success." I didn't succeed. A woman was parachuted into the company, taking over the position of the original boss. The laws governing human society are still too dark. It makes me, a hardworking monster, feel a bit sad. Lying in bed at night, I was pretending to be exhausted like a human. Shen Tang suddenly leaned over, her slender white arms wrapping around my neck. She spoke softly. Her breath as fragrant as orchid honey. "I want to go to Linchuan City next week." The barrage comments appeared again. "Linchuan, isn't that where the female lead went to college? Why is she going back to Linchuan? Could she be looking to rekindle things with a professor? By the way, does anyone know if the female lead and her boss actually did it last time?" The screen went black as soon as the boss entered the room, and I didn't get to see a thing. Black screen 1. So is the boss's part over now? It feels like it's been a while since we last saw the boss appear. That's just how this kind of story works. The female lead can have many men, but only the truly outstanding ones become regulars. No worries. The professor and the young female student are also quite thrilling. It's time for a recap. I lowered my head and asked Shen Tang, "Is that where you went to college?" She let out a weary mem and asked, "How do you know?" I struggled to dig up Zou Yan's memory from the deepest corners of my mind. When we were set up on that blind date, the matchmaker mentioned it. She said you were originally a top student at Linchuan University, but something happened and you didn't graduate. Linchuan University is one of the top 3 universities in the country. The students there are all future business elites and the chosen ones. Zou Yan is a salesperson with only a high school diploma. He originally had no chance to marry Shen Tang. Just because she didn't get that diploma, Shen Tang suddenly became a commodity that he could pick and choose from, even one of lower status than himself. He married Shen Tang, first because she was beautiful and second, to use her to build connections with her former classmates. Unfortunately, Shen Tang had long since cut ties with all her classmates and refused to mention anything about her past college life. Moreover, she wasn't a virgin. Zou Yan felt that he had married a useless, broken shoe, and became even more irritable and quick-tempered. Later on, Zou Yan died. I devoured his corpse and became the new Zou Yan. Shen Tang chewed over my words as if tasting them. Repeating, "Something happened," she lowered her eyes, a gentle smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "What you said isn't wrong. Even now, there are still some things I haven't finished dealing with. So this time, I want to see if I can resolve those matters and, along the way, retrieve the diploma they owe me." I handed my salary card to Shen Tang and drove her to the high-speed rail station. "Let me know if you need more money," I said as we parted, reminding her like a normal human husband would. "Take care of yourself when you're out there." She tucked her hair behind her ear and gave me a dark, unreadable look. Her fingers tightened slightly around the handle of her luggage. I smiled and asked her, "What's wrong?" She didn't say anything, just lowered her eyes and pressed her lips together. "When we get back, we'll live a good life together." How adorable. I lovingly kissed her forehead. "Darling, we're already living a good life together." She got into the car. I returned to our home alone. In the study, I touched the knife that killed Liu Yan, spying on Shen Tang's every move through the mycelium. I saw her check into a hotel near Linchuan University. wander around the campus for an entire day the next day, and finally pick up a lost student ID card. With that student ID card, 15 months later, she entered Linchuan University again and stood in front of Zhang Zhanyan's desk. Zhang Zhanyan looked at her with confusion. "Classmate, you are." She closed the office door, tilted her head slightly, and used her slender white fingers to remove her mask. With a slight curve at the corner of her lips, she asked, "Teacher Zhang, have you forgotten me so quickly?" Zhang Zhanyan's expression changed dramatically. "Shen Tang, why is it you? What are you doing here?" A hint of grievance flickered across Shen Tang's face. "Professor Zhang, didn't you used to love seeing me back then? I still remember you messaging me day and night, saying you'd never seen such an outstanding student. You praised me for being sensible and full of potential, and you said you'd take me on for experiments and help me publish papers. Oh, and you complimented my legs, saying they were slender and fair, and that my dimples on my lower back were beautiful. Have you forgotten all that?" Zhang Zhanyan said coldly. "The matter was settled long ago. The school has already issued a notice. My only mistake was being soft-hearted for a moment and failing to reject your seduction. You'd better leave now, or I'll call security." Shen Tang let out a sudden cold laugh. Sitting across from Zhang Zhanyan's desk, she fixed her gaze on him and said in a soft, gentle voice, "But Professor Zhang, your photos are still saved on my phone." Zhang Zhanyan's face twitched violently. Lowering his voice, he gritted his teeth and asked, "What exactly are you trying to do?" Shen Tang silently stared at him for a moment, then spoke softly. "I want you to tell the truth about what happened back then, return my degree certificate, and prove my innocence." Without a second thought, Zhang Zhanyan retorted, "You're dreaming." The next second, his tone softened again. "Xiaoshen, you're still young, and it's inevitable that you act a bit rashly. I was indeed wrong about what happened back then, but weren't you at fault too? That paper did have your name on it, didn't it? And those semesters when you received the national scholarship, though, you really think you earned it through your own efforts? Bringing up old matters won't do either of us any good. How about this? I heard you just got married, so let me give you a red envelope of 10,000 yuan. All right? A woman needs to have some money in her hands to stand tall in front of a man. As for those old photos, you shouldn't keep them either. Let me delete them for you." Shen Tang sat quietly across from him, her gaze fixed on a small painted thrush placed on Zhang Zhanyan's desk. This bird had been sitting there for so long that its once vibrant feathers had faded and chipped, revealing the dirty gray cotton stuffing inside. Even without wind, its wings still tremble slightly under the force of magnetism. Shen Tang was very familiar with this bird. She often stared at it. She stared at it when Zhang Zhanyan threatened her with graduation, when he pressed her against the office desk, and finally when she was coerced and bribed into taking all the blame. She felt weary. What was the point of flapping her wings endlessly? She would never be able to fly anyway. Shen Tang said, "Give me my diploma and tell the truth, or I'll release the photos. The choice is yours." Zhang Zhanyan asked with a grim expression, "Are you determined to ruin me?" Shen Tang barely twitched the corner of her mouth. She said, "Professor Zhang, you were the one who destroyed me first." A knock came at the office door, and a sweet female voice filtered through. "Is Professor Zhang here? I'm here to deliver some materials." Shen Tang sat on the chair motionless. Zhang Zhanyan rubbed his temples. "This isn't the place to talk. 3 days later, at Blue Bay Cafe, we'll meet there, and I'll give you an explanation." Shen Tang asked, "What time?" 10 o'clock in the evening. Shen Tang's gaze was as cold as ice. "I hope you won't be late. I am always punctual." She lowered her head, put on a mask, stood up, and left, brushing past the female student waiting at the door, leaving the curious gazes behind her. 3 days later, when Shen Tang arrived at the cafe, Zhang Zhanyan was already waiting there early. 2 cups of coffee were placed on the table, and he pushed one of them towards Shen Tang. "Try it. These are Kenyan beans, typically French roasted, with a natural fruity aroma. Remember, I taught you about this in the coffee tasting class." Although he was a philosophy teacher, he occasionally taught some elective courses as well. Shen Tang wore a black turtleneck trench coat, her small face hidden by the collar and sunglasses, revealing only her pale lips. She said coldly, I just want an answer. Zhang Xianyan sighed, no longer eager to push his coffee, leaning back in his chair. I agree. A flicker of emotion passed through Shen Tang's eyes. He smiled at Shen Tang and said, I will issue a public announcement, apologize to society, the school, and all students, confess the truth of that year to them, and have the school issue your graduation certificate retroactively. Shen Tang's breathing quickened as she asked, Are you telling the truth? Zhang Xianyan looked at her with a warm gaze, like a truly kind elder. Of course it's true, Shang. In fact, your teacher has always regretted leading you down this path one, where you were neither a proper student nor a proper lover. Shen Tang's throat tightened. Thank you, she said softly in a dry voice, tightening her grip on the tote bag strap beside her. Inside it lay a fruit knife. It seemed it wouldn't be needed today. She stood up to leave, but was stopped by Zhang Jinyan. After tomorrow, I will no longer be a teacher at Linchuan University, he said, shouting. Would you be willing, as my student, to take another sip of the coffee I recommend? Shen Tang hesitated for a moment, then sat back down, picked up the coffee cup, and took a sip. Zhang Xianyan watched her with a smile. Did you taste any flavors? Shen Tang licked her lips. It seems a bit citrusy. What else? She picked up the cup and took another sip. And also, she tried hard to taste it, so hard that figures flickered before her eyes, her consciousness scattered, and her limbs grew soft and weak. Before she could slide down from her seat, Zhang Xianyan came over and supported her. The scent that had haunted her for so long in her nightmares lingered around the tip of her nose, once more a mix of tobacco and men's body wash. He held her, restrained her, and let out a soft click of his tongue, his voice carrying the condescending pity of an elder. There's one more flavor, called foolishness. My poor wife was half carried, half embraced by her college professor, to a hotel. I watched as the professor threw her onto the bed and began rummaging through her bag for her phone. As he searched, he suddenly let out a hiss and pulled his hand back. Under the dim hotel lighting, a faint trace of blood quietly appeared. Then he pulled out the fruit knife and threw it to the ground. Tang, you're really heartless. Are you trying to kill your teacher? He pretended to be angry and slapped my wife across the face. Under the effect of the drug, Shen Tang didn't even have the strength to move a finger. Zhang Xianyan pulled out his phone from his bag, unlocked it using Shen Tang's face, and deleted all the photos. He tossed the phone aside casually, intending to turn and leave, but the corner of his eye caught sight of Shen Tang's body rising and falling with each breath. Though Shen Tang was troublesome, she was indeed the most exquisite among all the women he had ever tasted. He suddenly felt the urge to relive old memories. He turned and walked toward Shen Tang. In a daze, Shen Tang watched Zhang Xianyan walk toward her. As he unbuttoned his shirt, he said in a matter-of-fact tone, Tongwer, you actually missed your teacher, didn't you? That's why you try to get my attention in such a naive way. Don't worry, I'll satisfy you right now. Shen Tang watched as his calloused fingers brushed across her cheek, like a butcher hypocritically soothing the lamb beneath his knife. I want to cry, but I can't even control my tears. In a daze, she seemed to see that thrush again. Zhang Jinyan's hand slid from her face to her collar, about to unbutton her blouse. Suddenly, his breath caught sharply, his face turning a dark purple. His hands clawed desperately at his own neck, and within moments, he collapsed limply onto her. Blood flowed from his mouth and nose. Shen Tang saw a faint gray thread emerge from Zhang Xianyan's ear, swaying in the air like a snake before nimbly slipping into her sleeve. What was this thing, and why was it on her? Before she could think further, the hotel door creaked open with a squeak. Shen Tang caught a glimpse of a black figure out of the corner of her eye. Who are you? As if hearing her thoughts, the figure walked unhurriedly into the room, revealing clear and handsome features under the light. He stood in front of her and said with a smile, Good evening. Darling. It was Zou Yan, her husband who had come back from the dead. The first time I saw Zou Yan was on a damp, muddy, rainy night. He had been cut into more than 30 pieces, neatly stacked inside a black plastic bag. The taste of human blood is quite different. He was like a pot of seafood chowder, drawing me in from afar. I wasn't interested in him at first, although humans are on my menu. They're not the only thing on it. But I was truly curious about who killed him. This amateur murderer left behind an overwhelming amount of evidence. Among all the murder cases I have examined, this one ranks near the bottom. Driven by curiosity, I took a taste of Zou Yan's blood. Then, in his final memory, he saw his delicate, beautiful wife. It was probably her first time killing someone, and her movements were very hesitant, causing Zou Yan to suffer quite a bit of unnecessary torment. While disposing of the body, she wielded the knife with a blank expression, tears streaming down her face. Why was she crying? I was tormented by this question, my heart itching with restlessness. Though I had already walked far away, I still turned back. I devoured Zou Yan and became Zou Yan. Then, wearing his clothes, I opened the door to his home. The woman from my memories stepped out. Shen Tang stared at me in shock, her face pale, her expression like that of a sparrow toyed with by a snake. Terrified and helpless. In extreme fear, she called out in a trembling voice, "Husband," the itch in my heart stopped. At that moment, I abandoned the idea of eating her and then sifting through her memories. For the first time, I wanted to find the answer in a different way. So I responded, bending down to change my shoes like a human, and then asked her with a smile, "I'm a bit hungry. Honey, what's for dinner tonight?" 2 hours later, Shen Tang regained her ability to move. She got out of bed, picked up the fruit knife that had fallen on the floor, and walked barefoot to Zou Yan. 1 stab, 2 stabs, 3 stabs. She meticulously chopped Zou Yan's thing into a pile of minced flesh. Then she walked over to me and stopped. The tip of the blade points at me. "Were you?" she asked. I smiled, wiped the splattered blood off her face with my thumb, then grasped her wrist and said to her, "Stab it in." Shen Tang's breath quickened, her pupils slightly constricted. Her hand remained still, yet was forced forward by my strength. Half of the blade sank into my abdomen. It was like piercing into a wad of cotton or a handful of straw. Not a single drop of blood. She suddenly let go, and the fruit knife clattered to the floor. She retreated to the corner, curled up, silent and wordless. I extended 2 strands of mycelium and consumed Zou Yan's corpse lying on the bed. I also cleaned up the bloodstains on the carpet and the bed. Shen Tang watched in silence, then suddenly asked, "Is this how you devoured Zou Yan?" I hummed an acknowledgement and, right in front of her, turned a strand of mycelium into the likeness of Zou Yan. "Do you need him to help clear things up for you?" After a moment of silence, Shen Tang said, "Forget it, there's no need." So, I followed the same method and arranged a suicide for Zou Yan as well. On the way home, Shen Tang remained very quiet, and I noticed that the bullet comments had disappeared. When I killed Zou Yan, the bullet comments were still chattering away incessantly. But after Shen Tang chopped that thing into pieces, the barrage comments completely disappeared. Shen Tang suddenly said, "I need to go back to my hometown." She held up her phone to me, her eyes dark and heavy. "Xiao Chunhe is dead." Xiao Chunhe was her stepfather. It was also the beginning of her lifelong misfortune. "All right," I replied lightly, stepping on the gas. "Then let's go home for the funeral." I guess that's the right word. After 3 days on a highway, we finally arrived at Shen Tang's hometown. Xiao Chunhe had already been buried. It was Shen Tang's mother who received us. She led us to offer incense at Xiao Chunhe's memorial tablet. Shen Tang took the incense and asked in a cold, distant voice, "How did he die?" Shen's mother, her eyes still red, spoke in a soft, frail voice. "That night, he went out drinking heavily with friends. On his way back, he fell. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was already gone." Shen Tang let out a mocking laugh. "Lucky him." Mother Shen gently scolded, shouting, "How can you speak to your father like that?" I could smell the scent of sadness on Shen Tang, but her expression didn't change in the slightest. She stared at her mother and asked slowly, "Back then, why didn't you tell the truth? You clearly saw Xiao Chunhe sneaking into my room. You clearly knew his filthy intentions. You are clearly my own biological mother. Why didn't you protect me? You child, your personality is just too stubborn." Mother Shen clutched her chest, furrowed her brows slightly, and said reproachfully, "It was just a couple of touches, wasn't it? He didn't actually do anything to you. I'm weak and have no job if this blows up and he really ends up in jail. Who will support the two of us?" The air was so still you could hear a pin drop. Shen Tang stood motionless. Suddenly, she let out a soft laugh. "Your answer is exactly what I imagined." She threw the incense stick in her hand to the ground, stamped it out, and stepped forward to smash Xiao Chuanhe's memorial tablet. Amid the sound of shattering, she turned to look at the furious Mrs. Shen, a mocking smile curling at the corners of her mouth. "If there really are souls after death, then let Xiao Chuanhe come find me," she said coldly. "I'll personally send him down to the 18th level of hell." What a captivating wife. I was completely enchanted by her, unable to resist wrapping my arm around her waist and giving her a kiss. My wife has no plans to leave anytime soon. I'm not in a hurry either. After killing Zou Yan and Zou Yan, I transferred a small portion of their assets, so now I'm a wealthy monster. My wife rented a room for us across from her old high school. We lived a few days of peaceful life. During the day, she took me through every street and alley, telling me about the fried chicken tenders she used to love after school and which shop made the prettiest hair accessories. At night, we would indulge in passionate intimacy on the bed in our rented room. Now that we no longer had to pretend to be human, we could explore even more ways to have fun. I was more than satisfied. One day, while I was going downstairs to buy a watermelon for my wife, I was suddenly stopped by a man. "Zou Yan, what are you doing here?" I looked up, retrieved his face from the clutter of my memories, and smiled as I exchanged pleasantries. "Brother Zhou, long time no see." Zhou Chengli, my former squad leader. Also the last prey of my wife. He looked panicked, and after checking that no one was around, he pulled me into the corner of the alley. He whispered, "Zou Yan, I heard you married Shen Tang, that worn-out shoe. Are you crazy? Have you forgotten where the money for your internet access came from back then?" I nodded. "I remember, Brother Zhou. Didn't you earn it by selling Shen Tang's photos?" He looked at me with an even more bewildered expression. "Then why did you still marry her? This woman is very eerie. I've heard that every man who has any connection with her ends up dead. You'd better be careful too." I said, "But Brother Zhou, shouldn't you be the one most afraid?" What I kindly reminded him, "Wasn't that photo taken by you?" After being molested by her stepfather, young Shen Tang chose to board at high school. With her mother's false testimony, everyone believed she was a slut who seduced her stepfather. They poured cold water on her bed, deliberately tore up her exam papers, and treated her as invisible in the class. Only Zhou Qingli was kind to her. He firmly said he believed her, stopped other classmates from bullying her, and filled her desk with snacks every day. After she fully trusted and fell in love with him, he took photos of her in bed and used them as bragging material, sending them to their group of friends. He said to Shen Tang, who came to find him, "Now I can understand Uncle Xiao. This can't be blamed on him. You really are a slut. It was him who turned her into a whore." I said, "Besides, I've already died once." "What?" Zhou Qingli was stunned. The next moment, his chest turned cold, and his entire field of vision spun upside down. Behind him, the pale, gaunt woman stood like a ghost, slowly withdrawing the knife in her hand. "Shen Tang." A guttural sound escaped his throat, but in a moment, it fell silent. I extended my hyphae to dispose of the body, but Shen Tang stopped me. "Thank you," she said, looking at my face. "But not this time." "Why?" She didn't answer. Instead, she walked out of the alley with a knife in hand, spreading her arms wide to let the sunlight fall on her. Passers-by screamed and ran away. I walked over to her and mimicked her posture. The sunlight fell on us, warm and soothing. "The police are coming," I said. "You're going to die." She said, "I've been dead ever since I was expelled from Linchuan University. I endured my mother's betrayal, my stepfather's molestation, and Zhou Qingli's manipulation. I worked so hard to get into Linchuan University, I thought I had escaped that quagmire, that my life was truly about to get better. But then I met Zou Yan again. She turned to look at me and said calmly, "You know what? At first, I told myself to just endure it. After all, it wasn't like I hadn't been through it before. Just endure it a little longer, and everything will get better." Squinting into the sunlight, she said, "I'll graduate smoothly, find a job, support myself, and say a final goodbye to all those dark days of the past." Later, I realized that all of this was just my illusion. Since I can only live in the mud for my entire life, what gives them the right to stand so high above? Zou Yan was the first target of revenge. She found his matchmaking information online and arranged their first meeting. Just as she had expected, Zou Yan had long forgotten her. The plan went smoothly until the day she killed Zou Yan. When an accident occurred, she had underestimated how much blood a person could lose and also underestimated how hard bones could be. All the preparation she had done was thrown out the window, and she herself couldn't remember how much evidence she had left behind. That day, she sat on the sofa, anxiously waiting for the police, believing that her revenge plan would end there. When it got dark, the door opened. The one who walked in was not the police, but Zou Yan. Her husband, whom she had personally dismembered, had regrown his flesh and blood and stood before her once again. Liu Yin was an unexpected encounter, but it also helped her practice. Then came Zou Yan. Finally, Zhou Qingli. "I don't understand," I said in confusion. "Since they're all dead, why can't you go on living?" She clearly knew that I had every ability to help her escape this trial. We could go somewhere else and start a new life. Shen Tang did not answer. Her watery eyes fixed on me, and suddenly she leaned in, pressed her lips to mine, and gave me a feather-like kiss. "You don't need to understand," she said. "I rarely have the power to choose, but this time I actively chose death. Not everyone can smoothly navigate the tides of their own life. The final entry in the human manual, the lifespan of a human partner, is unimaginably short. Accepting their passing is the prerequisite for choosing to have one." I said nothing more, only took a step back, melting into the shadow of the wall. In the distance, the sound of sirens wailed as I watched her being handcuffed and pushed into the police car. In court, she confessed unreservedly to her crimes, calmly recounting the process of her actions, detailing all the violence, malice, and harm she had endured over the years, and even confessing to the deaths of Liu Yin and Zou Yan. Of course, regarding the latter too, everyone thought she had gone mad. In her narration, I felt a serene sense of relief. Finally, she was sentenced to death for killing Zou Qingli. She asked the judge, "Will you feel sad?" I knew she was asking me. I gently shook the strand of mycelium that had fallen on her. "Don't worry. Human emotions are far too complex. I haven't yet learned what sadness means." Maybe. The day Shen Tang died, the weather was beautifully clear. Sunny day. I still haven't learned to shed tears, so I had to weave her a rose out of mycelium. After the rose was made, I felt an inexplicable, overwhelming hunger. So I threw away the rose and burrowed into the soil. I devoured her without leaving a single bite. Then,